Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our third day. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we've been doing this for 3 days. And so I'm excited to be here in this fireside chat with the illustrious and most incredible person, Cyrus Meyer. What you're going to learn is thought leadership is ever continuous. And I hope you're going to be today excited about asking some real questions as we have this conversation. So, first thing I have to say, good morning, Cyrus.
Good morning. Sorry I'm not there in person.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. I'll tell you, I just heard this incredible. I mean, we had an opening. Thank you, Andres Gonzalez, our vice chair of our board. And then we had Miriam and Jasmine give us this great thought leadership connector. But I just got to tell you, I'm your new work wife. Miriam married us.
Okay.
Oh, so funny. Um, team, I can't hear. So anyway, so Cyrus, the first thing I want to ask before I even get into the introduction in terms of we know you're this great civil rights attorney and you have all this incredible work that you do in your firm and as well as the community and then the keynotes traveling all over the world. I just have to ask you, what do you do to keep yourself well, both psychologically and mentally?
Well, Pam, first of all, thanks for inviting me and being part of this program and for asking that question. I mean, I'm really blessed because I love the work I do. I co-founded Mehri and Scalet, a civil rights group, Working Ideal, a consulting group. I work with Pam Kukas, who's part of the program, and Fritz Pollard Alliance, a not-for-profit focused on the National Football League.
So,
I
I
love
did
all
ask
those
you how
things.
you keep yourself well.
Yeah,
I,
well, I'm saying part of keeping well is the joy of doing the work. The
ah,
cli
okay.
the clients, my coworkers and colleagues, and that is part of the joy. But at every stage in life, it's important to have a strategy, I think, of health and wellness. And as when you're in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, you feel really invincible. But then along the way, you realize, well, hey, you know what? I'm going to work out every day, which is what I do. I work out almost every day. I eat
Yeah.
very well, high vegetable. I call myself trending vegan. I'm in a very happy marriage and my kids are doing well. That gets to happiness. But my new strategy is this past spring, for the first time, I disconnected from work for like 2 to 3 weeks. I had a quote, real vacation. And my wife's from Nepal. We went there, did some hiking. That is one way to kind of clear your mind, is get up and see those beautiful views. But
Yeah.
considering this topic, we also went to Bhutan, a very small Himalayan country whose public policy and constitution focuses on happiness. That is part of their kind of zeitgeist of that country.
Hmm.
And they actually collect data on happiness. And we met with the
Ah,
scholars who collected data, and they do what we would call in the diversity inclusion world like a cultural survey, but they
yeah.
do that among climate survey. They do that among their population. And when they presented the data, I found that my interpretation of it, there were
Uh-huh.
three keys to happiness: economic security at a certain level, right?
Yeah,
Health, good health, and good family relations.
that's
Those are
right.
like that's what differentiated their data set from the happier people from the less happy people.
And
So
that's real.
it,
Thank you for that because, in our publishing summit last year, we had one of a trauma surgeon. I got to remember his name will come back to me that we interviewed, and he talked about if even if people are angry or frustrated or stressed, if they could think about something happy and laugh, then the stress one, it will release your stress hormones. You'll be a lot more healthier, and it just helps move forward in tough situations. So making yourself laugh and finding joy as often as you can, even in a tough environment, is a good thing. So thank you for sharing that depth. Because, and you know what I love also, Cyrus, what you said. You were describing the work, and I thought you were talking about, how do how you got here. But actually, you were talking about the joy and the passion of the
Right,
work that you do. And
right,
so many people at this conference, a lot of, but not just leaders, but everyone at this conference, or most people at this conference, are doing some hard work, but driving it through passion. And
right.
and the joy of doing it is what keeps them in it. So thank you for sharing that part of it. And I forgot to introduce myself before I introduce you. Assuming everybody knows who I am. I am Pam McElvane, the CEO of Diversity MBA Media, and the author of Skinny on Diversity Recruiting. And my next book will be out in the next, I think, 60 days on the skinny on inclusion. So thank you all for being here. So excited to have you with us. Okay, Cyrus, let's jump in. So one of the things I know we just talked about, you're a little bit, tad bit. Miriam shared, also gave some insights on your illustrious career. But I think what's most important about people, are the experiences that make them who they are. And that lends itself to the stories you can share. And I love your story. I really do. So I'm going to ask if you can share with us, what kind of, a little bit of your background, personal background, and what inspired you and set you on this path.
Well, again, I'm very fortunate. And I know what you're referring to, Pam. She wants me to talk a little bit about my family background.
Yes.
And so my parents are from Iran. I'm the son of immigrants, and they left an authoritarian government to come to the blessings that America has with freedom and education. My father was one of the really early immigrants to the US from Iran. He came in 1947, 17 years old. You couldn't communicate. There was no way to text or email back home, other than letters. And started from scratch, and at a very early age, fell in love with ophthalmology. At 22, he checked his first eyes, and he continued he did surgery. He was one of the top surgeons of his generation, but continued to work until his early 90s. Talk about joy of work. And so I learned a lot from him about professionalism, but I think my real passion came really from my mother. And she, as a student, went to one of the most esteemed um, colleges in the Mideast at the time, at American University in Beirut. Beirut, sadly, is going through a lot of trauma right now, but was kind of the Paris of
Yes.
the 50s in the Middle East. And like other college students, she spoke her mind. She told her other fellow students about she really wished Iran had a democratic government instead of a
Yeah.
Shah of Iran and that.
Yeah.
Little did she know that the Shah had secret police at that university tracking everything she said. And when she went back after her sophomore year, they imposed on her a travel ban. She couldn't leave the country, and she couldn't finish her education. Um, they were threatened by her, just a 20-year-old. And my dad met her coming back from medical school. They fell in love. But they wanted to go to the US to start a family and create a life there. Well, guess what? She had this travel ban on her. They couldn't leave. And so my dad apparently went from like one government agency to another after another, getting the runaround. And then he was sent down to some basement office, which I think was the secret police. And they had, here's our file on you in one page, name, rank, serial number. Here's the file on your wife. And it was stacks and stacks and stacks of papers that they had tracked, like notes of everything she was saying. So he finally figured out a way to get her out. They immigrated to the US. But that brought to them this kind of, and they was the early 60s, the civil rights movement, the John F. Kennedy, the idealism of America.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of infused with the household and I was the oldest, and me in particular. And I used to watch the news every night with my mother at like 7 years old. And before I knew it, I was like, by the time I was 13, I was conversing in all the politics, Watergate, and all this stuff. So they were, and went to protests with them, and anti-war, civil rights, all this. So I really got that early on, and I really felt
Yeah,
like my mother wanted to give back
yeah,
to America through me, because she expected high things from me to make America a better place, because it gave her freedom, gave education to her children. And so she really wanted me to kind of carry out some of that Kennedy era idealism. And I've been very blessed I've had that opportunity.
and you said a few things. I mean, you talked about your environment. So that's a real, right? That's real in terms of the influence of the environment, and how it manifests in us, as we become adults. But what's interesting and what just came to mind when you were talking about your mom's experience, I mean, the travel ban. Did we not just experience that here not long ago in the US? You talked about open expression of youth and retaliation. Hmm. Did we not just experience that not long ago on our campuses here in the place that we want to make great America great again? So it's kind of interesting how things just,
Right.
ever changing. Now, let me just also say this, and I love it, Cyrus, if you're going to be long-winded, but my other job that I also do, I am the host of WCPT 820 AM Chicago Progressive Talk of the Inclusive Voice. So, if you see me move into the host mode and jump in, I might do that. But for the most part, we want to hear from you. So thank you for sharing some of that. And please bring some more of that insights to us as as we continue to talk about in your family and where you grew up. So the other thing that I do want to talk about just a little bit before we get into some of the questions is just share a little bit about working ideal and and the work in the law firm and how and even a little bit of the NFL. Well, we'll talk about that later, but pretty much how you're working within your daily routines and some of the things you do and that led you to your firm, as well as working ideal, how this has helped you kind of reach out and extend beyond your legal work and doing other types of work. If you take a couple minutes and
Sure.
share.
Sure. Well, I mean, talk about the joy of work. And part of it is you get new challenges every day. So just to give a couple of examples with Working Ideal, which Pam Kukas and I founded maybe 6, 7 years ago, is you get new assignments. So for example, one company asked us, there was a lot of discussion with the data you shared yesterday about succession planning and all that.
Mhm,
Well, how do
mhm,
we recruit people of color in an industry and retain them that has been predominantly exclusionary? And so they had this idea of, well, maybe we could do something on student loans. And so we worked with them on kind of creating an innovative program that will help design it to help them recruit and retain talent. And so that was an idea I had never personally thought about a company could do. And then we also in the last year or so were asked by BlackRock. We were part of a team that do a racial equity audit. I prefer the word
mhm.
assessment.
Yeah.
We were able to do kind of a deep dive on every aspect of the company, not just looking at data, but interviewing senior executives. And then it wasn't just the workforce, it was where they were in the marketplace, their vendors, their customers. And that kind of 360, we were able to get a lot of insights and innovations that would help what's already the largest asset managing company do even better. So anyway, those kinds of things kind of challenge you intellectually. And in the legal work, we're always doing pioneering civil rights work, and we're always an uphill struggle. But
Hmm.
again, I have fantastic colleagues that help us, get success for
Hmm.
our clients.
See, that's
Um,
good.
So anyway, there's just so many cool things happening every day that I'm pretty much never bored. Put it that way.
So I'm going to tell you, thank you for that. And I really, love this opportunity to work with both of you. So let's just get into it a little bit. And, I will tell you, while I was excited about a lot of the work you do, Cyrus, I was most excited and connected most with the work you did with the Rooney Rule and the impact that that had on the country. And I do mean the country. And I was just thinking the other day, I'm like, wow, President Obama, I think in 2008, kind of told everybody, the organization, he wanted them to institute if they hadn't the Rooney Rule. And so I'm like, okay, this guy did what? He was a part of, huh? And with who? Cochrane? Oh my goodness. I said, okay, he's a celebrity. I'm happy to be close to him. And I have to thank Miriam for that introduction. So, being one of the architects of the Rooney Rule, how did it all come about? How did,
Sure.
it manifest, would put you in that mind frame to even say, I'm going to do this and
Well, there's
not.
a little known history about it. So, Pam Kukis and I, she was an associate, one of the first lawyer I hired when I started my firm. We were in an epic case involving the Coca-Cola company that really led to a landmark case that had really lifted Coca-Cola up to new heights. But we're dealing with the issue that they had such incredible talent, um, but they couldn't break through. African American talent couldn't break through to the higher echelons of the company. And we didn't want to say, well, you have to hire a certain number of people and this kind of thing. So we're looking for like, what ideas could we have that would help open up the process?
Yeah.
And by chance, I read an op-ed in the New York Times by Clifford Alexander, who was the Secretary of Army under President Carter, who just the other day turned 100 years old, as many of you may know.
Yes,
And
yes,
Clifford Alexander wrote this piece where he said, I went to the Army and I said, who are the colonels? Who are the people in the pipeline to become generals? And they gave him an all-white list. And he said, he said to the Army brass, are you going to tell me that nowhere in the United States Army there's a person of color who can become a general? Go back and do your homework. So they go back and they add Colin Powell to the list. And all of American history gets changed as he rises to become not only a general, but one of the most illustrious, not only military leaders, but
yes,
diplomatic leaders, Secretary of State. And um, all because we just added a little bit of inclusion. So when we went to Coke, we said, hey, why don't you add a requirement that when you interview for these management jobs where the glass ceiling is, that you include a diverse slate, not just people of color, women, but just underrepresented groups for the
yeah,
interviews. And so they took them a couple of years to get it in sync. But while that was happening, one day I read the sports pages. I know it was MLK Day in 2002,
yeah,
and Tony Dungy was fired as a head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, even though he turned around what was the worst franchise and made him competitive, get in the playoffs all the time, in championship games, and they fired him. And that was 2 weeks after getting a
yes,
screen with the Vikings, took his team to the playoff 8 out of 10 years. And I was like, they could do so much better. And so I thought it had this epiphany that we could collect the data on the win-loss records and look at the handful of African American coaches versus the white coaches. And I asked Dr. Janice Madden, a labor economist at University of Pennsylvania, to run those numbers. And then I asked Johnny Cochran to join me in putting out a report with the empirical data. So what did the empirical data show? That the handful of Black coaches went to the playoffs twice as often as their white coaches, and that's a marker of success. won substantially more games than their white counterparts, and were last hired, first fired. There was a double standard.
That's
And so
right.
the report we put out was called Black Coaches in the NFL, Superior Performance, Inferior Opportunities. And that report is probably the only report right now sitting both in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and in the African American Museum in DC. But we couldn't just
Congratulations.
dissect the problems. We illustrated it with real life examples, which came up in some of the discussions yesterday, the narrative, not just the numbers.
Yes.
But we also had to come up with a solution. So we added a proposal called the Fair Competition Proposal. And in there was a proposal to include the diverse slates. Now, keep in mind the phrasing, Fair Competition Proposal.
Yes.
That is really significant, not just then. And everyone told me, Cyrus, you'll never get 32 billionaires to agree to something that you as outsiders are advocating for. But I was like, look, how could they be against competition? Sport is competition.
That's right.
This is about making the process more competitive. So one day the leadership happened on the inside, which was Dan Rooney, the owner of the Steelers, wrote the commissioner and said, this isn't on you, the league office. This is on us, the owners.
That's
And
right.
so he it resonated with him because he himself and this turned around the Steelers franchise by casting a wide net when he picked head coaches. Like he was kind of doing what we were already advocating for.
That's
So
right.
he eventually got 32 owners to agree. And the reporters asked me, well, Cyrus, should we call it the Cochran-Mehri rule or the Mehri-Cochran rule? And I said, no. Let's call it the Rooney rule. It sounds better, and it's an internal champion, and I felt like would have more staying power if it was named after one of the owners than if it was named after me and Johnny Cochran.
You know, what an incredible story. And you know what's so fascinating? Because when you go back and look at the work and that others had put in prior to having something, you know, so prolific like the Rooney Rule, you know, we have the plan of progress, right? Johnson, you know, and then came affirmative action. And you know, and we had legislation that was supposed to be there to provide fair competition. I love that because that's all it was about, never about quotas. And so organizations, you know, they created these systems and born, you know, through born the African American Forum, the affinity groups, and what have you. So all these things to try to cultivate inclusion and still advance folks that were ready, and it still wasn't happening fast enough.
Right.
So we needed, you know, in hindsight, we needed another process, another selection fair process that was competitive for the talent to come up. So, you know, so thank you guys for thinking about it from a landscape, because a lot of times, you know, corporate leaders or large people, just say people in general, they like to use the sports analogy, you know. So, and it is real. So when you talk about the owners, well, let's talk about the CEOs at the top. When the CEOs make the commitment at the top to say we're going to do this, hence the owners, right? They say they're going to do this. So I think that you know, the correlation between the Rooney Rule and then the birth of diverse slates has been incredible, because what I found very interesting though, Cyrus, that not long after, you know, the Rooney Rule took effect within the NFL, you know, diverse slates started to be practiced in corporate America. Can you talk a little bit about how that transition came about, and you know, and then started to become, you know, fairly prevalent without the workforce?
Well, one thing is that, you know, the NFL is probably the most influential entity in a lot of ways in the country.
Yes.
So what was happening there kind of had a ripple effect, and some of it was kind of very visual and people could see it. So let's talk about casting a wide net. So I'm going to give you two examples. The two longest serving and arguably among the most successful head coaches today are Mike Tomlin from the Steelers and John Harbaugh from the
Yes.
Ravens. Okay. Well, because we're saying cast a wide net, look at a lot of different candidates. Well, Mike Tomlin, who's African American, was a very young guy who's actually thought about going to law school, but then got into coaching. And he was a secondary coach, and he had 1 year as a defensive coordinator, which is one of the pipelines. Only 1 year. But when he came in to do the interviews, he knocked their socks off. He got selected as a head coach, and he's still a head coach today. Meanwhile, John Harbaugh was a special teams coach. In the history of the NFL, I think there was only one time a
Yeah.
special teams coach became a head coach. But because the Ravens, and he's a white coach, cast a wide net, they said, we're not going to just look at one person or two people with a preconceived. We're going to expand our criteria to look at other types of criteria. Well, they get a Super Bowl head coach because they were open to looking at someone who didn't fit the normal criteria. And so you have whites, blacks, people of all backgrounds benefiting just by casting a wide net. Then you look at the success. 10 Super Bowl teams were led by a person of color as a head coach or general manager. Then you look at just the numbers before the Rooney Rule, less than 3%, maybe about 3% of the time, a person of color became a head coach when there was a vacancy. And since 2003, it's been a cumulative steady 20%. Not as high as it should be, maybe should be 30%, but there's a big difference between 20 and 3%. And right now, as we sit here, there are 5, and because they expanded the Rooney Rule to other positions, there are 5 club presidents who are African American, one of which is a woman, Sandra Douglas Morgan with the Raiders.
Yeah, yeah.
9 head coaches of color, 8 general managers of color. I mean, a lot of people criticize it wasn't going, it's had its ups and downs, which are true. People circumvent the rule, which has happened. Yes. But if you look at it from a generation, it's organically changed an organization and has created a lot more equal opportunity. And that has a ripple effect on businesses. And do you mind if I go into the work we did with the New York Times?
Go right ahead.
Okay. So the New York Times called me, I think it was this
November?
time it was getting ready for this conference last year.
Yeah.
When Miriam said, Cyrus, you got to go to this conference. I said, okay. Well, why? Literally, I'm at the airport and I get a call from the New York Times, and they're like, we want to do a story on the impact of the Rooney Rule for the business pages, not sports pages, impact on corporate America. And I said, well, I'm going to this conference and let me see what I can find out. So that's when I met you, Pam, and saw the data that you had. And so I said to them, look, don't talk to me, because I can give you a lot of anecdotes, but if you really want to look at the empirically, you got to look at diversity MBA and talk to Pam. And so Pam put together data, and I made a few suggestions, but it was shared with the New York Times. And here are the highlights. It's based on her survey, which is an incredible cross-section of data going back 18 years, but cross-section of many of the largest and most significant companies in our country.
And let me add this, Cyrus, too, because, there are more than 35,000 insights, but because these top-level investigative journalists kept asking questions and making me go deep and mine the data that we had, but it was great because they kept asking deeper questions. And so we were able to uncover some things that we had before. So I just wanted to add that. Go ahead.
No, I know. I mean, it was an interactive process, but here are some of the highlights. 85% of the companies are reporting using diverse slates. So that means this idea, the Colin Powell story by Clifford Alexander, and all the pieces along the way, leads to 85% usage of major companies. That's pretty significant. However, what about the 15% that don't? Okay. Well, the data showed that only 39% of the time, the data looked at the kind of SVP level, the feeder into C-suite, looked at that level. and found that the companies not using the diverse slates, only 39% of the time do they have women or people of color. Do those companies not realize that half of our population, half of our talent are women? Like, how could you be combined women and people of color only 39%
Yeah,
for your leadership positions, your SVP kind of level positions?
yeah,
But then you looked at the middle group that had the diverse slate, but without having the accountability measures that make it meaningful.
that's right.
And Pam and I came up with the phrase hit and miss group. Well, that hit and miss group only, and if your companies are hit and miss, it's time to move to the next level. But the hit and miss group, only half of their SVP type of level positions were women and people of color. Now that's definitely a step up from those that don't use the diverse slates, but they're also missing opportunities. And the
Yeah,
ones that are using diverse slate with accountability kind of measures to, measuring what's happening, making sure there's some cross checks on it.
yeah,
65% are women and people of color. 65%. That is they are winning the war on talent.
that's right.
They're going to get the more innovative ideas, and they're going to be the feeder for CEOs from that group. So the data showed it worked, and that was pretty powerful.
That was pretty powerful. It was, and I will tell you, and we're gonna move on after this. New York Times gave me street cred. I thought I had cred, but I really got some street cred, Cyrus, because then Washington Post called, and we did another look, and of course the Wall Street Journal called, and we did another look. But one of the pieces, the thing that I thought was most significant came from one of the questions from them around can you look at the CEOs for women and CEOs of color, and what is the percentage of them that have diverse slates with accountability? Well, of our raw data, over 400 or so companies, 100% of the CEOs that were women or people of color had accountability with diverse slates. Now, not to say there weren't other white male CEOs that also didn't fall in, but it was 100%
Right.
of the diverse and women CEOs. So that, so it's like they were clear on the impact of what that would be. And then the last thing that I would say is that the majority of diverse slates happen at I would say the VP and more senior level. Organizations, very few organizations are cascading diverse slates. So that's an opportunity too, is how are we able to look at, panels. So much for that. So thank you for that conversation. And people I know are waiting and want to hear. We're going to take a few minutes before, there's any questions out there to let us know. But I want to just talk about, because I know it's on people's mind. We talked about a little bit yesterday in your session. That was phenomenal. With the backlash of DEI, and practitioners are doing their best. They're the front line. They're the folks
Right.
up the front line, really having to reframe and talk about DEI or the impact of what it should be and is in the communities as well as within the workforce. What are some of your thoughts in terms of, what is actually happening and potentially, what folks can do about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think we can hang our heads up high. The DEI movement, 65% of the country, according to the Washington Post, supports DEI efforts. 65%. And my guess is that the companies that are involved in diversity MBA, that number would be higher than 65%. So we've already kind of, to large extent, won kind of hearts and minds of the country. We are not there fully. And but I also feel a lot of empathy for people in these senior roles on DEI around the country. A lot of them are my friends. I've also helped people, when they're with their contracts leaving or entering companies, so
Yeah.
I've gotten pretty deep dives and windows into this job. And I feel like, hey, there was such enormous pressure put on DEI officers following the George Floyd murder. to get maybe unrealistic goals in place about how to get from A to Z in a short time period. And then you have the backlash from last year's Supreme Court case, which has put a lot of pressure on pausing. But the companies that are staying on track are going to have the competitive advantage. And some immediately said that. Salesforce, McDonald's said they're doubling down.
Yes.
I talked directly with the commissioner, and they're publicly saying at the NFL, they're doubling down. They're not going to be deterred by this. And guess what? The chair of the EOC says it doesn't even apply to the workplace as college admissions. And later today, you're going to hear from Jenny Yang, who was the former chair of the EOC, and you'll hear from her. And she's a colleague and a friend, and she'll tell you great insights on that. So, but what the biggest risk is pausing.
Yeah.
Making progress in this area is so fragile, and it can unravel so quickly if you take your foot off the pedal, if you lose your kind of North Star on this. And then you're going to take twice as long to get back to where you were when you hit the pause button. And then let's just deal with facts.
Yeah.
We live in a country with racial disparities adverse to people of color. That is our country.
That's right. That's right. That's
all right. Health disparities, economic disparities, equal opportunity disparities. Your data you showed yesterday showed 14% managers are African American, but only 1% or 1.5% are CEO, right? So this is the world we're in. So you have to look at the data, and the data is going to continue to show in every company their shortfalls adverse to women and particularly to people of color.
Yeah.
So you just follow the data, follow the law.
Yeah.
The affirmative action plans that are required by the Department of Labor says, hey, if you have a shortfall, you have to address it.
Yeah.
So you have to do thoughtful interventions to address it. Now, here's what the takeaways I could say from my career. Now, some people may criticize that the reforms I've advocated for and my colleagues have advocated for don't go far enough or fast enough. But they do go in a way that is organically strong. And one book I read this summer that kind of vindicated my feeling about that, we've all seen the CNN reporter Fareed Zakaria. His book, The Age of Revolutions, goes from like 1600 to the present. And he basically says that the battle of ideas is really between open societies and closed societies. And so when you look at the anti-DEI people, they're the kinds of people that are trying to ban books, shut down competition by shutting down DEI officers who are trying to open the door for a level playing field. They're going to try to suspend the federal government from doing DEI. They're just kind of like going along with the kinds of things that are like anti-immigrant, anti-innovation versus our world, which is open society. We're trying to strengthen the economic strength of our organizations. We're trying to create innovation, but we can unify people by choosing reforms that I would call open society reforms. So let me give some examples of that. What shocks me sometimes that I've been started doing this work is how come there are all these companies that were like filling jobs, literally using a tap on the shoulder system where they didn't even post the jobs. So an open society reform is just post a damn job, let people compete for it. Let people even know about it. That's open society, okay? Second is expand your criteria so that you're actually using criteria that hits the mark on what's successful or multiple ways you could be successful.
Oh, and by the way, Cyrus, just not before we leave your point of just open the damn job. Well, guess what? In this remote environment, you can go everywhere right behind your desk. So let's throw that excuse away. that we
Right.
can't find the
Oh,
talent.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, we even have a
Okay,
better opportunity now. That's true.
that's right.
But job criteria, I just gave you the example, John Harbaugh, special teams coach. Well, if
That's
they
right.
use a traditional criteria, he never would have been interviewed, let alone become a Super Bowl head coach. And Mike Tomlin never would have been interviewed because he hadn't been seasoned enough. He
Right.
was too young. And so the criteria, putting our brain power into really figuring out what are the multiple ways to be successful in this job.
Yeah.
Third, we've talked about it already, diverse slates. That's about competition. Open it up. Then transparency. That's how an
That's
organization
right.
gets credibility. Talking to people, engaging them, sharing at least top level. Like, we do climate surveys, we do focus groups, but at Working Idea, we really have to coach the organizations,
We
share the
do.
top level data. Don't
That's
hide
right.
it. Don't just make it one directional, and then ultimately do what BlackRock did with Working Idea, and we teamed up with Eric Holder at Covington.
Hmm.
Um, do a racial equity, I would call it assessment,
Yeah.
because you're going to learn so much from within.
Hmm.
You're going to find out that, organizations get siloed and there's a good idea in one part of the organization that can be imported into another part to advance
And you don't
equal
even have to call
opportunity.
it a racial equity assessment because, it's a sensitive term. So then let's just do an assessment, an
Right.
equity assessment.
Equal opportunity assessment.
That's right,
Let's call
equal
it that.
opportunity assessment for everyone
Right.
and to get their true perspectives. And we're seeing more of that as well in a DLS, Cyrus. We're seeing that same output of work. And you talked about transparency. And I'm going to be honest with you, Cyrus. I struggle with how companies, so many organizations define transparency to suit their needs. And so hence all these issues that we're having, particularly white males feeling excluded and even other groups of color feeling excluded when companies choose to target a specific group. Let's say, oh, we want to target Hispanics because the reality is we don't have enough of them in the leadership pipeline either. So we're going to target that group, but they don't share why the focus is there this time. While we're trying to
Right.
balance our workforce to mirror our consumer base, all of these things. And so, they got to, get that off their shoulders and start to be transparent about some of these numbers. We are seeing more of it though, in the DEI reports, Cyrus. We do see some companies really putting their numbers out there. I love it. Walmart does it. Experian has done a great job. In fact, our number one company, Horizon, has done an incredible report. We're seeing, when you look at our 50 out front list, and particularly our top 20 companies, you will see that these organizations, I actually shouldn't just say top 20, I should say the organizations that are on that list, they are committed, they're doing the work, they're not afraid to benchmark so that they
Right.
can fill the gaps within their organization. And some of those senior leaders are here and have been in the sessions, which I really appreciate them hearing the ideas on how to get better. But I just wanted to say, you see, you kind
Sure.
of
No, no, I agree. I agree with that.
trans.
I'm just grateful that you've gained the trust of so many people and organizations that you're in a position to provide benchmarking data
Yes.
to people.
So with a little bit about, with the election just,
Oh
weeks
my
away.
gosh, how many days away is it? It's
Yeah, I kind of
30 days
I went
away.
to weeks. I didn't want to say
30.
days.
I hope everyone's voting
Two,
now.
4 weeks.
Vote early.
Oh my, well, okay, so, okay. Pam McElvane herself, myself, she, her, Aya, is not bipartisan. I am definitely for human rights, respect of all civil rights, respect of people for choices, and I am for a true democracy. So I'm going to state that. Diversity MBA media definitely wants to hear and be inclusive of all voices. And so
Right.
we respect everybody's opinions that's here. But I do want to say that if you do more of the same, the more of the same will stay and the more nothing will change. So we know that and we've heard that. So the nice thing is that here we are in 2024 with an opportunity to once again have history yet made again. So with that, just, what are some of your thoughts? Do you see, just from a perspective of what's
Sure.
going on in the election and also what you see for DEI?
Well, I'm going to try to be as nonpartisan as I can and be as objective and DEI focused as I can. There is a kind of crisis of democracy in America. We're in at least a democracy recession. If you look at the data, like The Economist that does a democracy index, around 2016 or 17, we went from being one of the thriving democracies to what they call a flawed democracy. And we're behind countries, small countries like Uruguay and Mauritius, it's just stunning because we're like, I grew up thinking we're the #1 democracy, but now we're on the flawed democracy side. So I went back and I started to personally read as much as I could
Mhm.
about democracy from Athens. What are the
Good point.
challenges of democracies? And here is one of the takeaways that I took from it, that democracies and self-determination are the exception in human history, and they are revolutionary. To think that, hey, we're not going to have an authoritarian leader, we're actually going to determine our fate. But to do that, people are much more comfortable doing that with people like themselves. So
Yes.
the real challenge
Yes.
is how to create an inclusive democracy. Our democracy, as an example, started with genius, lots of genius,
You did.
right? About
Yeah.
how and
Yes, it
they
did.
schooled themselves on history to do it, checks and balances and reining in excessive power, but also had diabolical evil in it. It had slavery in it.
Yes.
Now they argued that maybe it's supposed to fade in 20 years, depending on how you interpreted it, but they had evil in it. And so that tension of yes, we're going to do something radical and bring people in for self-determination, but we're going to exclude a lot of other people doing that as white male landowners. That's kind of epitomizes the history of democracy. But the goal now is how do you create that inclusive democracy? And I think
Yeah.
that needs to be our vision. And yeah, go ahead, Pam.
No, go ahead. I was just seeing if there had any questions. Go ahead and finish your thought, and then we'll
Yeah,
go to.
and I was going to say that the presidency has enormous influence on the zeitgeist of the country. Okay, I kind of look at the presidency as its kind of commander in chief role, foreign policy, leadership, and hopefully leading. And most of our history, we've been leading, trying to expand democracy around the world. Um, and then there's domestic, like the major legislation, hopefully solving problems. But a third part, I'll call it the communicator in chief, sets the tone,
Yes.
sets the values. And so, a positive example, when 9/11 happened, obviously we were a very hurt and wounded country who was following that horrific event. George W. Bush, President Bush, communicator in chief, exuding values, went to a mosque, right? He went to a mosque to say to all of us, we respect people of different faiths. We respect people who are Muslim. These were terrorists, not these Muslim Americans.
That's right.
That sets a tone. We talked about my mother's travel ban. Well, I represented the Iranian American community in taking on the travel ban when it did happen. And the Iranian American community has done a huge amount as immigrants to our country.
Yes.
Leaders in science, business, job creation. And, we were then all of a sudden being denied having grandparents see grandchildren and all kinds of stuff. But
Yes.
I'm saying that sets a completely different tone.
Yeah.
And I am concerned if we go back to that kind of thing, we're going to have the mass deportation that's going to be very divisive.
Yes.
And it's going to affect a lot of innocent people and separate families from children, parents from children, and all that kind of stuff, which will adversely affect all the workplaces that everyone hears
Yeah.
from.
And that's huge. I will just say, you summed it up really, really well. and to lean into inclusive democracy,
Right.
and if we take that and define that for our own purposes for family and community, now you're really that's a good way of bringing people together.
Exactly.
So this has been an incredible conversation, and I want to just get a couple questions in,
Sure.
Cyrus, from our audience before we wrap up.
Sure.
So, team, how are we going to do that?
Hi, good morning. This is Sasha Parrish from DMBA. We have a few questions here in the chat. The first is, how do you start the conversation around implementing diverse slates at a corporation? Any specific company stories you would like to share?
Sure.
Okay,
One of
so
the first
that
things,
won't work. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, I know
Go
we're
ahead, take
short
start,
time.
Cyrus.
Yeah, I understood the question. Well, one of the first things we did at Working Ideal when we started is we did a workshop for Nike, and we just sat down and went through it all, looked at real time, looking at data, and then helped them go through the decision-making tree of how they were going to create a diverse slate process for them. And so it starts with just sitting down, I think, doing a workshop, and we've done that for other organizations. And so I think that's it. You just have to, get the people to know how they're doing this in a room, and we can, we know how to do it. We know the pitfalls. We know the emerging social science. That having two diverse candidates makes a massive impact on the outcome. For example.
Yeah, and
Two
I would just
people.
say yes, and to what you said, Cyrus, in that asking, clarifying the talent acquisition and the talent management strategies with your senior leaders. And if they're saying, yes, we are committed to want to diversify our leadership ranks and develop our middle so that we can have internal talent that we can advance, you can look at and leverage your HR business leaders, your diversity councils, and put together panels to identify, different talent throughout the organization, and then require externally your search firms and your external consultants to bring in and identify talent so that it's competitive. So we're not saying diverse slates are exclusive at all of white males. We're saying they're also inclusive
Right.
and they're typically white women, women of color, and a man of color. And the best in class companies will include identity. So
Right.
they'll include 26%, but only 26% of companies do that. When you talk about veterans, LGBTQ, persons with disabilities, they'll add that to the slate. But the most popular slates are if you just add a woman, a white woman, a woman of color, and a male of color, there's a 50% opportunity that they're all qualified and overqualified in some cases that you'll have it. And so there's some very basic practice, foundational, I'll call it foundational things you can do also. But I will say, though, do not implement a diverse slate practice without leadership approval across the business enterprise, because you want it to happen and occur organically throughout your organization so everyone understands the value of it. Because you don't want it to be,
Yeah.
people to be defined that differently. But thank you for that. That's great. Do we have another question?
Yes. So someone asked, what are the key changes that we CDOs should plan for if there is a change in administration?
Well,
Let's say, in his opinion, in our
yeah.
opinion, go
Well,
ahead.
again, I'm trying to answer without being partisan, but what will happen if the former president becomes the president again? You will see the DEI efforts in the federal government be shut down by executive order. I don't think you'll see a huge change at the EOC. You could ask Jenny Yang when she speaks tonight. I found the EOC to be pretty nonpartisan. Like if you go to an EEOC hearing, you can't say, oh, that's a Democrat or that's a Republican, that there's a general consensus towards trying to create equal opportunity, maybe varying ways of how to get there. I wouldn't think there'd be a huge change there. But I think the most important thing, if that happens, is it's going to create chaos in the country and in their workplace. And, it's going to be hard to, manage the feelings and the perspectives because of the workforce, so the people there. I think that's going to be a real challenge. So figuring out, well, hopefully you don't have to go through that scenario, but if you do, that's, the disruption to the country means a disruption to the workplace.
Yeah. And I will just add to that, organizations that were on the fence and are on the fence about integrating DEI had an easy way, a quick way to move off of to fall off the horse. And they did. And then they'll have another reason why they can fall off the horse. Organizations that have made the investment into the institution and the structural change of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means, both to their stakeholders, their workforce, their communities, are not moving away. They may shift and reframe so that it's more inclusive, and that's happening right now. And I believe that will continue to happen. And I will say, let's go back to the foundational, courageous and bold and open expression conversations that you had when George Floyd and the many other hate crimes and violence occurred, to engage your workforce and to ensure your workforce of your principal values and what will not change. And that's going to be the work probably that we want to do anyway for both sides. But Cyrus, oh my goodness, can you believe an hour is passed already? Oh my goodness. And Cyrus, folks, is here at the conference. So ping him in and he'll definitely get back with you. And I want to thank you so, so, so much for the work that you do, Working Ideal, everyone around you, and how you've helped uplift Diversity MBA. So with that, we're going to sign off. And Cyrus, do you have a last?
Sure.
Second?
Here's my last word for the DEI movement. Don't underestimate yourself. I would like to see DEI officers in the pipeline for CEO because
Yes.
we're strategic. We look at the business, we look at the vision for the company. So get in the, let's position all of you to be interviewed for the next CEO jobs.
You know what? And they're already there, right? The Maverick basketball team has a CEO, and Essence Magazine has a CEO that was a CDO. And I think you also at the NFL Federation has a CEO that was a CDO. So it's already being done. So with that, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Bring your thought leadership ideas and opinions into moving forward as we learn, educate, and celebrate today. Thank you all.
Thank you.